All right, guys, back here on Southeastern 14 with Chase Robinson. We continue our look at all the SEC football schedules for the 2024 season. Coming up here sooner rather than later now. We are almost there to college football season, and we're going to break down the schedule for the Kentucky Wildcats. Before we do that, let's tell you about BetOnline, number one source for your NBA Finals and Stanley Cup playoffs. This season, every stat, every matchup, live odds, spreads, they've got it all while the games are being played, so you can check it out there. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, plus you can unwind with some of the 150 slots games that they have. So head to the website today to get on the action. Use that promo code. We always tell you about it, BLEAV, B-L-E-A-V, for 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online. The game starts here. All right, Chase, Kentucky Wildcats. And what it almost became a very interesting offseason for Kentucky. Of course, you had the Mark Stoops stuff, the A&M thing, all that, and it was just kind of a whirlwind there for a little bit. But we now know kind of how things set up for the Cats coming into the 2024 season, and we're going to take a look at their schedule, which does begin with a couple. Actually, they've got 4 straight home games, which is always a nice thing to have if you're a team in the SEC, where you kind of load up on the home games. They're going to do that playing Southern Miss, South Carolina, Georgia, and Ohio. So really kind of a fascinating first, sort of quadrant here in the schedule as you look at it. Certainly the game against Georgia is going to be the one that stands out the most, but a big game too there in week 2 against South Carolina. And hey, you never know when you get your first 4 games at home. Kentucky can shock the world in week 3, beat a Georgia. You can certainly look at where that could set you off into for the rest of your schedule. So.
Yeah, you say it's nice to have the first 4 games at home, especially when 2 of those are SEC games in the first 4 games, which you don't see a lot. I mean, I think Southern Miss, it's a good game to start out with. Southern Miss has had some good teams there out of the Sun Belt. But what really interests me is you got a conference game week 2, and you got South Carolina coming in. You don't see conference games usually this early. So we're going to find out very quickly what this Kentucky team has this year when they have the Gamecocks rolling into Lexington there. South Carolina beat Kentucky last year 17-14. And so the Gamecocks have actually won the last 2 games against Kentucky. And so this is a chance. Kentucky's got the Gamecocks back at home. I think this is a chance for Kentucky to get back beating South Carolina. But interesting, you always learn a lot early in the season about teams, and you have a conference game week 2. That's tough for Kentucky. And then you look ahead, not only do you have a conference game week 2, but you have most everyone's top team in the country preseason of Georgia coming in week 3. Everybody's going to be chasing Georgia in the SEC this year, I think. And so this will be the first conference game for Georgia. So, we'll see if that's an advantage at all for Kentucky. I'm not sure. But Kentucky needs to find an advantage and take advantage of any advantages they do have in this one. Because, again, you got South Carolina week 2, Georgia week 3. That's a tough 2-game stretch. You do have that at home, but that's a tough conference stretch for Kentucky in the first 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, it is for sure. And again, I feel like the Kentucky South Carolina games are always just kind of, and that hasn't always played out every year, but they've been some close games. And we said some of them had not been the highest scoring games, it seems like, in recent years as you kind of look back at it. And then, you look at, like we said, Southern Miss, I think, coming off a 3-9 season. So you would think Kentucky's a pretty considerable favorite there. The Ohio one's interesting. Remember, Ohio went 10-3 last year, and actually, won in the Myrtle Beach Bowl. They beat Georgia Southern to finish 10-3. That was a team that, remember, beat Iowa State last year too. So if you're just kind of looking at it, a lot of momentum for that program coming off of a 10-win season in the MAC. And the Georgia one, remember, if you want to talk about a team that's got some motivation against Georgia, we all know what happened the last time Kentucky and Georgia played. There were a lot of high expectations going into that game, and Georgia came out and, quite frankly, just took it to the Cats. And so Kentucky will have, I think, again, some extra motivation now for that one. But boy, it will feel a little bit different if you have some motivation coming off a win against South Carolina than if you've just dropped a home game against the Gamecocks and then have to regroup the following week for a primetime game on ABC against Georgia. So that's a significant one there. But yeah, like that's the thing. You look at kind of the start of the schedule and you're looking up and saying, all right, well, this is kind of, we've got at least they're all at home. But then it's like, okay, now we got to go to Ole Miss the following week to end September. And you're thinking, okay, your first road game, it'd been nice if that was like your first road game, let's say at a South Carolina or at Florida, one of those kind of games. But no, you've got to go play Ole Miss, who, let's call it what it is, Chase. I mean, I don't know if there's more of a more buzzworthy team in SEC football entering 2024 than Ole Miss. This is kind of the year that everyone has circled. When you look at the roster that Lane Kiffin's put together, this could be the team that finally gets them over the hump into national title sort of contention.
Yeah, it is, and it's in Ole Miss. This will be the first conference game for the Rebels. And really, when you look at Ole Miss schedule, and we will do that here in our series, but really their only test in the first 4 games, they have Wake Forest week 2. Ole Miss as a just the way their schedule falls. This is the first conference game, and so we'll see if Kentucky can expose some things on Ole Miss early in the game, but this is going to be a tough one. If Ole Miss is playing like I think they will at this point, they're going to be really good. And so, and I think this game kind of will be based off what happens in the first 2 conference games. With losses to South Carolina and Georgia, how are we going to see this Kentucky team bounce back, respond to that? If they're able to win a couple of those, one or at least one of those, maybe the South Carolina one, then you compete with Georgia, make it respectable. And then coming into Ole Miss, I think that could change the narrative of this game, really. And with Ohio in there as well, coming after that Georgia game, get a win there, get some momentum heading into Ole Miss. But I'm interested to see just the response, especially after that Georgia game, how Kentucky handles that.
Yeah, I think so too, because like I said, there will be some added motivation for sure, I think, to say the least. When you look at just kind of, again, sort of what the expectations are going to be for this Kentucky team, I mean, that's the thing, right, is, for Kentucky, like Mark Stoops has raised the expectations now every year to where this is a team that expects to at least be in the conversation there. I mean, we'll see. I mean, if they can kind of reach that level, this season. But I think that's, again, kind of an interesting start because, like you said, a slip up and lose to South Carolina, and you go in to have to play Georgia. Now you got this game at Ole Miss. That could be trouble early for the Cats if they can't navigate that. But luckily, after the Ole Miss game, they're going to get a week off. And then you want to talk about a very important stretch. That's because you get 3 games here against Vanderbilt, at Florida, Auburn, and home. I mean, to me, Chase, without being the Vegas expert here, who knows where Vanderbilt's at that point? Who knows where Florida's at that point? Who knows where Auburn's at that point? So you talk about some if we had to predict the spreads on these 3 games right now, not a clue, because you just don't know where these teams are going to be at, because these all do feel like teams that want to try to break through this season. I think it'll be tougher for Vanderbilt than the other 2, but we mentioned, you look at the Gators, big season for Billy Napier there. There's no question about it. Hugh Freeze trying to really get things taken off for Auburn this season after, probably a little bit of disappointment, certainly to finish last season the way they did. And now you look at this and feel like there's a scenario where you don't know what Kentucky's record's going to be in those first, 5 games, but these may be the 3 most important games on the schedule, because if somehow you're able to reel off and win all 3 of these games, 2 of them at home, which I think there's probably a decent chance Kentucky is the favorite in at least 2 of these games. They could be favored in all 3, depending on where Florida's at. So this is an important one. October 12th through October 26th, circle it, Kentucky fans, because I think this is one that really could define their season if, to this point, everything, let's say they're 4-1 or something, with the only loss, or let's say they're 3-2. Sorry, they're probably not going to be favored against Georgia and Ole Miss. But these are the kind of games that if you don't win all 3, if you don't win 2 out of 3, if you were to drop a couple here, look at the back half of that schedule, Chase. At Tennessee, at Texas, still got Louisville. That's where you could sort of be in the danger zone.
Yeah, for sure. And Billy Napier has never beaten Kentucky. And so it is in the swamp this year. They have played there, and Kentucky won there a couple of years ago. But I think this is a big one for Kentucky, like you mentioned, especially with it at Florida. If they can get this win, I think that'll be huge. there at Florida. And again, who knows what the Gators season is going to look like. Billy Napier needs to win this game if he wants to stay coaching at Florida. And so I think they're going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder there. But I feel like Florida Kentucky is always a fun game, but Kentucky's won the last 3 times they've played. You really want to win this one. I think Vanderbilt's going to be better, but I think that's a very winnable game for Kentucky. So let's say they beat Vanderbilt, they're able to get a win at Florida. I think that really sets up also an interesting matchup with Auburn. It's one of the games you don't see a lot, the Auburn-Kentucky matchup, just because they've been in opposite divisions. 2020 is the last time they played. Auburn has won the last 3 times that they have played. So Auburn's going to be coming off a trip to Columbia, Missouri, though. So, hey, maybe that sets up a good time for Kentucky and Auburn to meet up if you're a Kentucky fan because of what Auburn is going to have just played in Missouri. So I think all of these 3 are very interesting games, especially Florida and Auburn. I think they're winnable games for Kentucky. I really do. And but I think that Auburn-Kentucky game is going to be really fun because I think Auburn is going to be much improved this year. And it's also a good thing Kentucky has that one at home. They don't have to make the trip down to Auburn as they'll be hosting Auburn after going to a tough place to play in Florida. So, yeah, very important stretch for Kentucky there with those 3 rounding out October.
Yeah, good news for Kentucky, too. Vanderbilt the week before has to play Alabama. That's in Nashville, but still, that will be a home game for the Tide there in that one. And then if you look at it, Florida the week before has to go to Knoxville to play Tennessee, which is, of course, a little bit different now with the way Florida and Tennessee is structured because usually that's earlier in the season. Not the case this year, just based on kind of the new schedule. So they're playing in the middle of October, whereas usually we're used to seeing that game, second, third week of September. So yeah, so that's kind of a good setup too for Kentucky, I think, to have those 2 teams playing some pretty tough matchups the week before they get the Cats. So all right, as we continue to move through the schedule here for Kentucky, then you do get the game against Tennessee, and that is, as always, one that will be one of the bigger games on the schedule for Kentucky on November the 2nd. And, like we said, I think the Vols, Chase, certainly high expectations coming into the season. That's just kind of the way it is now with what Josh Heupel has done there the past couple seasons. And I think really, for Kentucky, as you look at this is one, too, where Tennessee gets the week off. Before that, they will have played, the game against Alabama the prior week. But this is, when you look about like sort of important games, Tennessee's got, and we'll go through Tennessee's schedule. I think Tennessee's got a very favorable schedule to this point. They're going to have to play NC State, which will not be easy. That's a neutral site game in Charlotte. They got to go to Oklahoma, which will be tough. The Josh Heupel Bowl there. But really, I think Tennessee could be favored in every other game on their schedule, even against Alabama potentially. In that one, again, we just don't know. Alabama's just hard, Chase, right? Because you just don't know exactly, year one for Kalen DeBoer. You don't know what the differences are going to be and all that. But no doubt this will be a game that has, high implications, I think, in terms of where both teams are at, maybe chasing playoff spots and everything. But as always, this is a big one that both teams circle here as they'll meet up once again in Neyland Stadium.
It really is. And how big would that be for Kentucky and Mark Stoops to be able to go into Neyland Stadium and win this game, especially if, let's say, Kentucky, we talked about the tough 3-game stretch with Vandy, Florida, and Auburn. If, let's say, Kentucky's to win those 3, they've got a ton of momentum heading into Knoxville. And that could really change that game, I think, if they're riding a 3-game win streak against, some good teams and one of those on the road. So I think this game may vary on how the rest of the schedule is going for Kentucky. Are they riding a lot of momentum? Have they competed against the Georgias and the Ole Misses this year, prior to this game? So I think this game has a lot to do with how Kentucky is done. I think, and I think those 3, Vandy, Florida, and Auburn, are very winnable games for Kentucky. If they win all 3 of those, I like their chances going into to a good Tennessee game, a good Tennessee team there in Knoxville.
Yep, I think that's, like you said, a very important setup, potentially where these teams are at that point. And who knows, if Kentucky's won sort of some of those swing games, it could be a nice spot for the Cats. All right, so now after Tennessee, they get the week off, much needed, I think, at that point for Kentucky. Murray State after that should be a win for the Cats, and then it is the game against the newcomer Texas, but it's in Austin, and if you look at kind of where Texas could be at that point, if you're curious, where kind of their schedule sets up, they play Arkansas the week before on the road in Fayetteville, which will be a very hostile game, but the problem is if things have gone south for Arkansas at that point, I mean, you don't know, Chase. I mean, you could even have a coaching change by that point. Who knows, right? It just depends on kind of where things are at for the Hawks. So kind of an unpredictable setup, as with all these games. It's just, you could have an injury, one team much better, one team worse. You just don't know. But we're playing the hypotheticals here. This could be, a very tough spot for Kentucky. I think any way you draw it up because, two, we know if the expectation is for Texas that they want to make the college football playoff, maybe one of the favorites to win the whole thing next season. What will they have done to this point? What will they have? What would their record be at Michigan? Against Oklahoma, against Georgia, because those are all games that are going to define whether they are, I think, a college football playoff team next season. And then you get this one against Kentucky, which should be significant, like we said, for both teams here.
Yeah, I like Texas. I think they have the roster just on paper to maybe win it all. I mean, I think that's what Texas has this year. But you mentioned their schedule up to this point, and can they win these big games? They couldn't last year. Oklahoma beat them there in that rivalry midseason, but Texas still able to win the Big 12 and go on to the college football playoff. So can they win all these big games going up to this point? This is a game that they've only played once, Kentucky and Texas. And so there's not really history to this game. It's kind of a fresh start for the two teams. So can Kentucky compete? I think it'll say a lot about where Kentucky's at. They've played some tough teams. So has Texas. I think this game will be dependent a lot on how both teams have played so far this year. Still, I think Texas is good. They're disciplined. They're going to be ready to play in this one, even with rivalry week coming up the following week. I think Texas will want to take care of business in this one, especially eyeing the college football playoff. But Kentucky is going to be playing kind of that spoiler if we think Texas is as good as we think they are, if they are that way this year. So I think this one could be interesting late in the season. Strange things can happen, but this will be a tough one, Kentucky, if Texas is playing like we think they can.
And then Kentucky finishes up with Louisville. The Governor's Cup played once again here, and that one will take place in Lexington. So good for Kentucky, but in all honesty, it wouldn't matter where this game was played right now for Kentucky. They've kind of owned the series in recent years, even the one last year, right, where Kentucky was kind of the disappointing team. Everybody thought coming in, good spot for Louisville. Didn't happen. Kentucky won that game 38-31. We know kind of where Louisville was at that point. But, yeah, Kentucky's now won 5 in a row in this series, 6 of the last 7. And quite honestly, some of them not even been close. And so I think this is, kind of a big one here. And if you're looking at it from Louisville's standpoint, where will Louisville be at that point in the season? Playing your usual ACC schedule. They've got road games against Notre Dame. They got to play Miami at home. They go to Clemson. And then, of course, you've got the normal ACC traditional rivalry between Louisville and Stanford, Chase.
Yes.
It's so weird to look at Louisville's schedule and say, oh, yeah, they have to go to Stanford on November the 16th. So
that is crazy.
Will they still have some jet lag 2 weeks before? I doubt it. Coming into this game, they play Pitt the week before they play Kentucky. So.
Yeah, and this is, again, one of those strange rivalries. Like Louisville played in the ACC championship last year, but Kentucky was still able to beat them. No. I think Kentucky has the players that could do that again. But yeah, I think it's always an interesting kind of twist on this game. It doesn't matter what the teams have done previously, but Kentucky just they find a way to win this game, and I think they will again this year for sure.
Yep, I think Kentucky, who knows, like we said, they've got some very interesting parts of their schedule. And we always try to just break these schedules down by different, 3-game stretch, 4-game stretch. Kentucky's got a lot of those games that, are season-defining type games. And that's what happens when you play in the ACC or the SEC. So, we'll see what happens with the Cats. But there you go. There are thoughts on Kentucky's schedule entering the 2024 season. Chase, as always, hey, it's going to be a lot of fun to see how things unfold for the Cats, and we'll be continuing to look at these rest of the schedules here at Southeastern 14.
Yes, and if you like what you see and you want to sponsor our content here on Southeastern 14, we have a way you can do that. You can send an email to caroline.smith at southeastern14.com, and we can begin the conversation. So now you can partner with us, and we can help you spread the word about your brand here on Southeastern 14.
Yep, check us out. Let us know. Like I said, caroline.smith at southeastern14.com. You can advertise with us, all that. And we appreciate you guys watching as always. Check out everything else we got here on the channel. Lots of football, lots of baseball, lots of basketball. It's all here for you. So hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out. Thanks as always for watching. We'll talk to you again here soon at Southeastern 14.